Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our third installment in our Lessons Learned from Industry Leaders series. My name is Jason Mills. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at KMC Controls, and I want to take this time to welcome and thank each one of you for joining us. On our panel today is Brian Gearheart and Tom Shircliff. Brian's an Area Vice President with KMC Controls and covers the Eastern Seaboard. Brian is a mechanical engineer and has been working in the controls industry since 1982. He resides in Raleigh, North Carolina with his wife and 3 sons. Tom is a co-founder and principal at Intelligent Buildings, a management consulting and managed services company founded in 2004. Tom is a recognized expert in the field of commercial real estate consulting and risk management, including acceptance into the International Counselors of Real Estate. Today's panelists will be discussing how and what future-proofing means in a post-COVID world. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat box. We'll do our best to answer those questions at the end of the webinar. And any questions that we can't get to, we'll do our very best to email you those answers as soon as possible. I don't want to take any more time than I need to, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it right off to Brian. Take it away, Brian.
All right. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone y'all are in. Again, my name is Brian Gearhart, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. What we're going to be discussing today is future-proofing buildings and your smart building tech strategy, and something that I've spent the last several years working alongside Tom in, so look forward to this conversation. It'll be more of a conversation than anything, but more so future-proofing and what it means, but also what it means right now relative to COVID-19. It is impacting us. So, Tom, could you open us up with explaining that a little bit?
Well, yeah, it's funny, we talk about smart buildings and future-proofing and those kind of things, and really you can't ignore the elephant in the room, obviously, especially with what's going on in real estate, which is what we're talking about. In the post-pandemic or COVID world, future-proofing has some different dimensions to it. I think we're going to show the audience that a lot of the fundamentals are the same, and that's going to be comforting in a lot of ways. And it's really the manifestation of it changes a little bit. I mean, what was it, 45 or 60 days ago, and at least in the real estate world, we weren't talking about social distancing, density monitoring, touchless experience. What even is that, right? Temperature taking, contact tracing. In our company, we've had to add these type of things to our smart building use case library, right? We thought we were really doing well with energy efficiency and moving people around quicker and productivity and these kind of categories. And all of a sudden, the smart building conversation, including future-proofing, includes this entire new category of public health, which in the past meant more about what was your CO2 sensor saying and those kind of things.
Very well. So if we attempt to establish a baseline, right, for what is future-proofing right now relative to smart building industry, if we just take a few steps and look at some very, I guess you'd say, strong examples of what that is, and you could expand on that for me as well.
Yeah, and you made me think of one other thing too, is that for our audience is that what's interesting now is that we in the smart building and the manufacturer and the systems integrators community, and even the property management community especially, we have a burden now, not just to get out there and make a living and do good, but we have a burden to help create confidence for occupants to return to commercial buildings and to thrive in them. And there is going to be the bad cliche, but the new normal. I know we're all concerned about a lot of things, but one of the things we need to add to that is we have this collective responsibility to create that confidence, and the smart building conversation is part of that. I think we can all be a part of that solution. So getting back to your point, it's funny, we talked about future-proofing in the pandemic era and post-pandemic era. That is, as we alluded to already, that is a use case category. Like, what am I going to do with this smart building things? And as you and I were talking before this, it's interesting. We've been in business in smart building consulting and services about 16 years. And when we started, the use cases were almost all in the energy efficiency category. I mean, that was a smart building, an energy efficient building, right? And then that everybody knows that started to transition a little bit in terms of a priority to a broader sustainability conversation, right? And carbon was, for some companies, was more of an indicator than kilowatt hours, right? Then in 2008, it was all about money, right? That's whatever it is that, it was the financial crisis. And then coming out of that, in smart buildings, we were all being asked to focus on productivity of the occupants, right? So if your head's starting to spin, when it wasn't finished yet, because after productivity in a good economy, it was really about attracting and retaining talent. And so an experience in a smart building was the priority. And here we are now, very obviously, public health is the priority. All those things have built upon it. And Brian, I know you've been in this business a long time, and what you've seen, and I think what a lot of us have seen, is that the fundamentals and the future-proofing approach hasn't changed that much. And I think that's the thing I want the audience to take from this, is that those fundamentals that we'll talk about in this session today enable what we're all worried about now is public health, but a lot of those same fundamentals enable productivity and experiences, and also enable energy efficiency and so on.
Fantastic. Yep. So I know you've taught me this well over the years, but there are really three elements to that, right? When you start looking at how you do future proofing, right? I believe there, it's an acronym we call OCN, right? I'd love to hear more about that: open, converge, and normalize. So if you could give us some background on that as well, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, and you're talking tech terms to a political science major, so I'm going to try to keep up here. But the first one you mentioned was open meaning open protocols, and for the non-techies like me in the audience, that just means not proprietary. If you buy a system and sensors and sort of that have functionality that you need, one of the things you want to make sure is that it open means a couple things. One, not only one single company forever can service it or touch it, right? The other thing is, can I, as the building owner, or can your customer, as the building owner, depending on what it is, get and use their own data? Right, those are two really simple concepts. Can I, if I buy it and own it, can I manipulate it with whomever I want, really, and can I get my own data out of it? And I know that's something that you and your company, KMC, really focus on as well, right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, I mean, there's three hallmarks of all of our design for our product. The first being open, second secure, and the third is scalable, right? But open is the beginning of that, right? That's how we start to future-proof facilities, is that data down the road can be used by just about any system that needs to see it. Why? Because it's tagged properly, it's allocated to the right space, and it can be recalled quickly, right? And one of the things that I wanted to transition to as well, we hear this term use case, right? There are several use cases for future-proofing and for smart building technology. But you brought up something very interesting as we were preparing for this, and that is, a lot of people think that, or tend to push use cases to a thing, right? And you used two terms yesterday that I thought were very definitive of that. So could you enlighten us a little bit on what we discussed yesterday with regards to that?
Yeah, sure. So listen, all of us really love technology, just in the society we live in, and even in buildings. And so one of the natural things that people do when it comes to that is talk about systems and features, right? And as opposed, and we're going to touch on use cases, but it's the reverse of what you should be doing, because even for whether it's your customer or whether you're the building owner manager, if you said, hey, here's this cool lighting control system, and it does this and that and the other, what can we do with it? Now you've got a hammer in search of a nail, and maybe you find it. But then I've got this cool energy analytics system. How could we use that? Then I've got this cool water reclamation. How could we use that? And you keep going down this list. That conversation never ends, right? You're just systems and features. It literally, it never stops, because you can cover every building technology and feature that you can imagine. So rather than doing it that way, if you were to just take a step back and say, what do I want to happen in this in this building or in this situation? And the great news is there's so much technology available, you can make it happen. If we were having this conversation 15, 16 years ago when we started our consulting company, you really you couldn't dream it up and then just assume you could make it happen. But now you can with use cases. So I'll give you an example. We had a customer who was wringing their hands over getting a new parking control system, and asked for our help, and we said we're happy to help you. And they said, and we said, but what started all this? What's your problem? And they said, we're in a dense urban environment, high-rise building. Everybody comes to work at the same time in the morning. There's this log jam, and people can't get they don't get to work on time, even though they thought they should have. And we said, well, you don't have just a parking problem. You have a get people from the street to their desk on time, faster problem. And when we kind of broke that down, we ended up working with the parking control system, the access control system, the elevator system, and to some extent also the lighting control and digital signage, all. And that made for a get people from the street to their desk use case. And we didn't just say, I need a system for that. And boy, let me tell you, again, whether you're a building owner manager or whether you're somebody that serves them, when you're talking just in regular non-tech terms, it is so much better for everyone. You get to a technical solution and implementation faster, and then the customer gets to the results faster. So it sounds kind of cliche, but really think in terms of use cases, really helpful.
Excellent. Okay. And appreciate you expanding on that. That's one of the things that, I love the technology, and including the stakeholders is also a big part, right? You're going to have a lot of discussions with a lot of different groups in the facility now, as opposed to, we used to talk mostly to the building engineers or, even folks above them, but now IT and folks like that. So having that comprehensive conversation is very key.
Well, that's right. And a way to say that in slightly technical terms, if we go from the regular business conversation one step down, that you could say that use cases are sequences of operations between different systems usually, right? Like if I pull in the parking lot, I want the access control to know it's me and be ready for me. And if it's the access control gets triggered, it knows what floor I'm on and it's taking me up, right? So that sequence of operations is really important. To your point, that may take the building manager, the systems integrator, maybe the customer office manager, those, a group of people to make that all work.
Great. Okay. And then as we look at the foundation, for a smart building approach, right? You mentioned yesterday, you can't build it on a house of cards, Brian. It's got to have a solid foundation. And that starts with a large discussion and about tying those systems down, the configuration thereof, just making sure they're, relatively speaking, bulletproof, right? How do we do that? And can we broach into the cyber issue as well?
Yeah, and maybe just to tie that back to, you mentioned earlier the OCN, the open and converged. To get that sequence of operations, ideally, you have some kind of convergence of your systems, right? So if I want the leg bone to talk to the hip bone, they've got to be connected in some way, either electronically or physically or both. And to your point, that is a I hate to say it, but that's a network. That's an IT network. There's a server, there may be a switch, there's cables, and likely some kind of remote access, and all those things are connected to the building control system. That it took me a while to figure this out, years ago, that all the building control systems we think about as sort of operational technology, not information technology. But that's a little bit of a misunderstanding. They all work on some kind of computer or server. They all typically have some way to connect the multiple floors and the floor level controllers together. That'd be a network, and they're internet connectable. So, you really can't take all of this building technology and just kind of put it in another world from the IT issues as you're talking about. So you've got to take this, what we call vendor risk management approach, and cybersecurity is a big and important part of it, but not the only part of it, right? So,
Thank you.
people people think about cybersecurity, they think about firewall and a VPN and internet, and that's all true and important and has to be dealt with. And we should talk about that because that's one side of the equation. The other side is the building control system itself has in its configuration many different aspects that relate directly to operational risk. So are there complex passwords? Is it using the current software that the manufacturer offers, the current release? Has it been backed up? Maybe ever, but certainly recently. And also like user credentials. Is there one password with a yellow sticky on the monitor? When people leave a service systems integrator company, is that person's credentials taken out? All that credential management. So we should touch on cyber proper, but I would say that the Alamo is the building control system itself. If I had to pick, believe it or not, I would rather have a very tightly configured control system with lockouts for passwords and password attempts and have it backed up and have it current. If I could only choose that or just a good firewall, I would take the system being tight because ransomware doesn't care about firewalls, right?
That is true. Yep. And I'll stress as a manufacturer, again, one of those three hallmarks is secure, right? We build it so that it can be secure when it leaves our facility, but after it gets out in the space, it takes folks who have to have a good cyber practice in place to keep it secure as well, and that's very important. So I can tell you that I've learned a lot of things. When you're around this industry as long as I've been, or I should say we have been, you start to learn new terms and you feel like you're one of the gray hairs in the room. So I look at things like I've learned terms like API hooks and things like that from our IoT director, Tim Vogel. Something I didn't really know about until recently, and having to tie into an open system and then also keeping it secure, and what means do you have to do that? So it's definitely a challenge that we have to stay in front of it every day because that technology is just rapidly advancing. So.
Yeah, so maybe how do you, as a manufacturer, and you can make it as secure and solid as you can, and then after it leaves the nest, you're saying that that's something that you have to have a constant dialogue with your system integrator partners about best practices?
Indeed. And I will always say, most of the integrators that I work with are way smarter than me on the networking side and the cyber side. So, but yeah, that is a conversation that they're having a lot with their end users as well. We've had phone calls at the ninth hour from the IT groups who have said, okay, tell us again how you're tying this down, and what do you need as far as ports go? And you're saying you want an open port, or you want to be on this network. And the answer is, well, yes, but we need to have those conversations earlier, and that's something that we push for all the time. When we're out in space talking to our integrators.
I think there are best practices like that, and I think you guys, of course, and your partners do a great job. But I want to defend the system integrator community for a second because a lot of times the customer, the building owner and manager, doesn't even have a policy, right? So you're kind of left to the system integrator to either follow a best practice or do the best that they can, I think the industry is starting to come around because a good conscious system integrator would say, look, I'm going to do the best practices here, but I work for this building, I work for this owner and manager and so forth, and it'd be a lot easier if you would convey and have a policy, and we will follow that. So I think we're starting to see more of that as as we've dealt with this IT and facilities culture clash. Where the IT would say, I've got my corporate network or my organizational network, whatever kind that is, and I don't want any of those building systems on it, and or maybe they have to be on it, and I don't have any prescriptive requirements for how they configure those systems, which is actually worse than not being on it at all. So I want to advocate that the owners and managers need to almost serve the system integrator community better in that way, and have and convey a policy.
Fantastic. Okay, and thank you for expanding on that. I know that was that was something that we spent a significant amount of time talking about yesterday, and how to develop that, and really how to expand that conversation so that it's not so scary, right?
Yeah.
I always say, it scares me as an engineer. I'm like, y'all deal with that. Just, tell me how much load we have in the building or something.
Yeah, and actually, and on that score, if you will, for the system integrators, it's really not hard to configure the control system according to a policy. I mean, they're in there. It's really just a matter of just doing that in a place where they're used to configuring. Maybe we kind of swing back just for a second to the remote access, right, or the internet connectivity piece, and that is something that's also pretty inconsistent by building and by customer. And so a lot of times the system integrator just says, hey, I've got to connect, I've got to do remote access service, and so you're going to do it one way or another. And that is something that has been a little bit of the Wild West, right? There's been what we used to call POTS telephone lines, and there was plain old telephone lines, and then there was DSL and off-the-shelf switches and routers and these kind of things. And again, what are you supposed to do if you need to be connected remotely and there's not anything provided and not any policy? So I think that as we talked about, having a configuration policy is important for everybody. So is having a consistent way that you do remote access into the building, and I would say in a way that recognizes that it is a different environment than the typical IT environment, right? If you tell your employees at a big corporation, here's how you're going to telework, and here's how you're going to get into our systems, well, that's fairly well established and in a very prescriptive way, and it's not so in the building control systems world, especially coming from IT departments. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done there.
Fantastic, and I do think relative to our current situation with the pandemic, I'm certain that a lot of the end users who may be on the webinar today, and even the system integrators who are listening in, have had that question now. Okay, we want to reoccupy these facilities. What can you tell us about how they're operating? And basically, do you have remote access? Can you tell us how our building's doing? And I know that there's so many good ones out there that the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is yeah. How much do you want to know, or how much can we get ready for you before you reoccupy, right?
Yeah.
So there are some really good, I think, emergent use cases thanks to the pandemic that I think we can use moving forward as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and I want the reason I think we ended up talking about vendor risk management, cybersecurity, is back to this point of future proofing. It's because, as we discussed earlier, we want to get to these use cases. To get to a use case, that's a sequence of operations between different systems, which requires networking and connectivity, right? And when you have that converged infrastructure and those protocols, and that we didn't touch on the third one, that data normalization. I mean, just because you have an open protocol doesn't mean it's the same, right?
True.
So, but nevertheless, the point for the audience is that you have non-proprietary systems as much as you can. You can have a converged infrastructure as much as you can, and then you want to normalize that data so that now we can create these use cases, right? If this, then that, all underpinned by this cybersecurity and vendor risk management. I think that really is the future-proofing recipe. And now, Brian, to what you were just saying is, what am I, now that I've got this power, what am I doing? Am I pointing that power, and it's a little bit of everything, but am I pointing that power towards operational efficiency? Am I pointing that power towards creating an experience? And it's not an or, it's what's the priority. And I think the back to the pandemic for a moment, if we determine, as a lot of people have, I need more outside air, at least in certain periods in time, well, that goes against the optimal, operational cost. But that's okay, because we're going to still be as efficient as we can be. But with what we have to deal with, and what we have to deal with is a priority that means we're more focused on public health in this time, and the environmental conditions in the building. It does, which by the way, which means we have to be even more focused on operational efficiency given that, right?
Indeed, that is correct. So I guess the next question I'd have, or the next topic for discussion, right, is folks are listening in, they've heard it they've heard the recipe and they're like, all right, how do I get started? What's my jump off point, right? And there were 3 elements we discussed yesterday. One of them ties back into having a good cyber protocol in place, and that was one. The other 2 I thought were really good relative to inventory and then assessing capabilities. So would you be kind enough to enlighten us on those other 2 attributes as well?
Yeah, sure. So let's just imagine we're sitting here owning or managing a portfolio, whether it's corporate, commercial, healthcare, higher education, government, military, whatever it is, right? I've got this portfolio of buildings, and now I really want to future-proof, and I've also got to deal with public health changes, because remember we said we have the burden in the smart community and the property managers and the system integrators. How do we help create that confidence? Well, if you've got a decent sized portfolio, it's probably not the most appealing thing to say, I'm just going to go buy a bunch of new systems for everything in my portfolio to satisfy these public health use cases. So naturally you'd say, wait a minute, I have a portfolio with a lot of digital systems in them already. I mean, Brian, since probably the mid to late 80s, almost every building control system has been made to be digital, right? I mean, it's programmable, it's got features, it's convergible, it has sequences, it's internet connectable. So the first thing you'd want to do is take an accurate inventory, and maybe not of everything that has a green light on it, but maybe take half a dozen systems that could be relevant to the public health use cases you want to employ. What systems and contractors and networks, what is the clay that I have to work with? Because really not only the most cost effective, but probably the most effective in general is if you can say, wait a minute, if I can create a sequence and secure my systems and work with the contractors that I have for the most part to create these, that's going to be the fastest to deploy and the most sustainable, no pun intended, the most sustainable to continue to operate and to monitor, right? Mm-hmm. And Brian, this is another thing that really is about smart buildings in general. People kind of freeze up and think, what is the Star Wars thing I need to go get at Best Buy, right? Wait a minute. If your building was built or renovated in the past 30 or 40 years, you've got some digital things to work with. And I think that inventory is a place to start. And also to your point, Brian, about the assessment is, okay, I've got the stuff. Now what are my capabilities and my connectivity? And as we said, is it cyber secure to start with? We don't want to build on that house of cards. But looking around, right, taking that inventory and documenting that, and then pulling out of that, a number of use cases.
Great, thank you, Tom. And then, so we've taken the steps to do it, right? We have the recipe. We know what our jump-off point is, and we've taken the inventory. We've assessed the capabilities. One of the other things that we discussed then is there's got to be a group commitment, right, to leverage that data to to not only currently set the future waypoints, if you will, for your facility, but also then to identify what are those key metrics that we can start to put in place. So can we expand a little bit on the commitment, right? And I think it goes back to stakeholders. I think that's such an important element. I used to love that bullseye that we used to have, right, where we showed all the stakeholders in the company and said, these folks need to be involved in this conversation. Sometimes folks would shake their head like, really? Like, those people need to know about this? The answer is yes. So could you just talk about that group commitment a little bit?
Yeah, because especially, and just again back to the pandemic for a second and this public health, I mean, HR is involved. They used to not be involved in energy efficiency, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, can I take a temperature, or can I only ask if you have flu-like symptoms? Which is that? And then am I monitoring? What happens if I'm doing density monitoring with one of my lighting control sensors, and mm-hmm. it tells me that I have some kind of density? What do I do with that information? Right. That's another reason why, if you just take one step back and say, what are we trying to accomplish here? And then these days we've seen, Brian, that most organizations have a COVID-19 or a pandemic task force, and those task force are made up of multiple different people in the company. Again, HR and IT, and you could go through all the departments, even finance and CFO and all the major department heads, and they are put together, to your point, to be a group of stakeholders to get to their solutions. So, and the other thing is, it's becoming, especially now, and it has been going for a number of years, to more of a top-down conversation. Like if even going back to the sustainability time when that was the priority, now it is one of the very important things. One of our large banking customers' CEO made carbon one of their top corporate priorities, and so boy, did that make it easy coming downhill to work on things like energy analytics and sequence of operations and these kind of things. And so I think for everybody out there, just to be aware that smart buildings is not a pigeonholed energy efficiency only kind of a practice now. It really is, how is the building literally affecting public health? How is it helping me attract and retain talent? How is it helping me do what we do for a living in the organization? I mean, it is really it's gone from the boiler room all the way up to the boardroom, and I think that's been a really good development.
I think so too, and we've even seen a new development recently from the standpoint of the commitment to use the data. We've been pushed as a manufacturer by some of our clients to say, okay, we want more information in a dashboard or a user interface around IAQ or indoor air quality, right? Right. But yes, it's been talked about in the past, things like humidity and CO2 and monitoring these things. But now it's at the forefront. These building owners and the integrators and the folks in the space, they want to know that they have a healthy building. Not only that, they want to be able to see it for themselves, whether it's in a mobile device or on a large, let's call it an operations center. They want to know that they can see that data, and that's something that is emergent, right? So it goes back to future proofing. If we didn't have that data in the systems, if we hadn't tagged it properly, and we couldn't recall it and hadn't aligned it all to come out the right way, it would be a huge lift right now. But right now we're in a pretty good spot with it.
Brian, that's exactly right. And you think about this, wow, what opportunities are there in real estate? And it also kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. Real estate's one of the largest, if not the largest, asset class in the world at $15 trillion, right? But every other segment you can think of runs their entire business on data. Healthcare, finance, manufacturing, right? And here we are in real estate saying, please have open protocols, please use the data. It's going to be really good for you, right? And to your point, though, that starts when you select a solution. Is that data going to be mine, even if I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to be doing with it? And can I get it all and use it all, and at least start archiving it? Because we all know that historical data can play a role, even if you didn't do something with it, a year ago. It can really be impactful. And also the good news on that in real estate, commercial real estate, is that the dashboards you mentioned and the analytics have gotten so much better and easier. Right? I mean, it used to be you really had to be dialed in to even use the data you were getting. Now, really powerful dashboards and easy and really powerful analytics. The only thing we've got to do in the industry, which we spend probably more of our time on than the technology, is then what's the workflow behind that? So if I see something or I see a trend or I'm going to make a data-driven decision, then that's got to have some workflow and accountability behind it, or it's the tree that fell in the forest, right?
Indeed. Yep. And you bring up a good point about the evolution of analytics. 2 or 3 years ago, I was one of those guys, maybe because I was getting a little long in the tooth, but I would say, analytics need to be more prescriptive. I need to see more specific applications. I want to see, real outcomes from it. And within the last, probably 6 months, I've just seen this massive leap of really good analytics coming out that, can pinpoint, and they're extremely, and again, I'll use that term, prescriptive. So I have seen, again, and it's all a byproduct of future proofing. That data was in there. People have figured out how to write the hooks, and I'll use that term again, to pull that data and to use it in a good manner. So, it's exciting. It's an exciting time, but at the same time, always changing and always in front of us.
Yeah, but I want to emphasize your point because we're talking about future proofing. Just deciding as a real estate or entity that it makes common sense to me to make data-driven decisions and have more automation, right? And even if we want to stay away from terms like AI, I mean, but that's actually attainable, right? If you made a decision to use data to make decisions and to have just more automation, you're doing AI and you don't even realize it, right?
Indeed. Yep. So, and again, I'm going to go back and just mention it. It all starts with conversation, and this is one of those forums that for that, we educate each other and listen to each other as we move forward. So, Jason, we've pretty much gone around the entire compass here. So I just wanted to see if we could open it up, maybe some questions, or if you had any additional questions you wanted to throw in.
Absolutely. Thanks for throwing it back to me. This has been a very fruitful, productive conversation, I think. We've got one comment here that's saying that, talking back about how the shifting priorities when we're talking about future proofing, saying that he's not quite sure that the priorities have changed, but public health and safety is always the #1 concern of building service providers and building owners. Then comes comfort and productivity, efficiency, and etc. And in his opinion, we're just getting back to the basics. But he does have a serious question for Brian. Okay. So I'll let you guys comment on the first part there.
All right.
But I'm gonna give you after you answer that, I'll go ahead and give you his actual serious question.
Yeah. So one of the first one, I think that partly depends on the business that you're in, right? So if you're in the software code writing business, that's different from being in the manufacturing business. That's different from being in the banking business. And I agree, and hopefully we communicated that all those different eras of priorities didn't make the other one go away, but it did focus on the priority. And just a quick, almost cliche example, we have a large campus customer who, 60 days ago, we were completely helping them focus on building operational efficiency, and we almost overnight pivoted again to that thing about more outside air and public health, and that really changed what we could get out of the building because of the new priority. So it didn't make operational efficiency go away, but when the priority changed, it just caused a slightly different gaze of direction.
That's great. All right, so this one's the serious questions from Chad. This is Brian. Serious question. When can you have me over next time to jam out with you? He plays guitar and sings, and it looks like you have quite the setup.
Yeah, I have to admit. I'm sitting in my father-in-law's recording studio at the moment, and the reason I am is because my wife and I built a new house just a little further out in the country that has satellite internet. So y'all did not want to see me try to do satellite internet. I will tell you, my father-in-law loves to have open sessions with people. He's been a long time musician, and they can actually turn this neighborhood on its ear pretty fast. So yeah, you're welcome anytime. Come on over.
And all those amps are on solar, so that's even better.
Yeah. This entire room is. In fact, my father-in-law was just asking me about putting a photocell on the front of his house before I walked into this meeting. So I think I'm getting the message out in my family personally. My family is tired of hearing about how I have the house in the cloud, and I show them the graphs every day of what happens when they keep their doors open and such. And but I think I'm changing the industry from the grassroots side of it.
All right, so on this one, they're just asking about developing and enforcing a security best practices for vendors. If someone wanted to do that, what steps should they take, and can they take now to start developing and enforcing that security best practices?
I think it's a really, really good question, and I think it's an opportunity for system integrators to adopt a best practice floor of the things that they will do. Like in the absence of the customer giving certain requirements, we're going to adopt a floor. And I know there are software tools out there now that can do that, and that can help even audit the contractor. The system integrator, even self-audit. And I think this is it's an interesting question, because we have heard in the industry, we have customers that are going to more of a vendor consolidation mode. So when you think about vendor risk management, one of the things that's a risk is having dozens or hundreds of vendors. It's just a risk to keep up with policy. So if in the terms of risk management, even cybersecurity, there's like vendor consolidation wave, if you will. I, as a systems integrator, if I were one, I would want to say, well, I shouldn't be a fallout of that consolidation, because look at my best practices, look at how I'm taking care of your system, and here's a third-party stamp on, so to speak, on what I'm doing. So I think it's a really great thing for a system integrator to do proactively.
Awesome. And now we have a follow-up question to that, and is do you have any examples of the security audit software solutions that you might recommend, or that you have used or evaluated in the past?
Yeah, we use a company called totembuildings.com, and that they are their only business is this vendor risk management orientation. So it's contractor friendly and provides customer dashboards, and has been pretty effective. And also I want to add to that, when you talk about software and audits and those kind of things, the key in our industry of the systems and the controls and the contractors and the integrators is it's already fragmented and very disparate. It's not to overcomplicate that, right? It's because when people hear cybersecurity, it just brings in connotations of, binders full of policy and blinking lights and data centers and all that. It's really, 8 to 10 best practices for a building control system and a contractor. If you're doing that, you're going to be, regrettably, you're going to be in the top 10% right now.
Now we've got a question here that kind of brings us back on topic for COVID-19 and future-proofing, and that's on the importance of wireless communication, specifically for staying a short amount of time in a building for adding new sensors. And so the question is how important, or is wireless communication important in a future-proof building?
Yeah, Brian?
So one of the things that I've noticed, over the last 5 years is that wireless is not necessarily just taking over, right? It definitely has uses, from a sensor standpoint, whether it's an ocean or from a protocol standpoint, where it's backnet over IP through wireless. It has applications for things like going in and monitoring a facility short term, or adding some temperature and humidity density, if you will, to a building and archiving that data. So I do think that it will play a more important role coming, because people are going to want more information, and they're going to have existing facilities where we can't go in and run pipe in there, we can't drop 2 conductors down the wall. And the Enotion products are extremely reliable. As long as you follow their best practices for deployment, work quite well. And again, I'll go back to, and this is a true thing, lightheartedly, I have 10 Enotion sensors at my house. I mean, literally in every room. And again, my family's tired of hearing about them, but they just give me fantastic data about what's going on in my house. And I do think that it will play a role in that regard. And then likewise, from the controller communication standpoint, the IP layer, I do think as well, if we need data controller that could aggregate inputs and things like that, yeah, it's available, and I do see it emerging probably more because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's right. The only thing I'd add to that is that don't be the hammer looking for a nail. Like, I got to do wireless. Like, what are you trying to monitor? And do you have a building automation system or a lighting control system or something that can also monitor that, even though it might not have been originally planned for that? And then if you have to add sensors, fantastic. Then decide what's most prudent. Is it wireless? Is it wired? Whichever. So go the other direction with the conversation.
Sorry, I was muted. I started talking. All right, so we've got a question here about analytics. It says, Tom, you're dead on with the analytics and how they've become consumable. But the question is, what's the workflow behind it? He said, it's brilliant and important to define for the consumer or the product.
Yeah, so and Brian can certainly speak to this. I'd like for you to follow, but you know, when fault detection and diagnostics, energy FTD software first came out, everybody was focused on who had the best algorithm, right? I mean, it's like, how do you do it? How do you? And then when it started going in to the marketplace, the software was working fine, but nothing was happening because of a couple of things. Because first of all, the faults, the energy faults were lining up by the hundreds, literally, and there had been no plan to prioritize them or to see which ones were false positives and all this kind of stuff. And then the second challenge with that was in the way we always like to say, we like to tune into the way real estate actually works. So if you've given a contract to a facility management company or to a specific contractor or a system integrator, you don't get just to walk up to them one day and say, here's 86 work orders now I got to have fulfilled by Friday in order to make my energy software pay off, right? So there was not only a workflow problem, but there was also a way the money in the contracts work problem. So it goes back to what Brian had said earlier about really lining up these stakeholders to say, are we really going to do this? And are we going to require, say, for example, the next time we hire an SI or even a facility management or property management company, require them to do X, work orders or faults? So Brian, I'd love for you to comment since you really were steeped in that world.
Yeah, I'll go back to a conversation that I actually had with some analytics folks, which is really true. So in our industry right now, and I think anybody that's on this call can agree, it's really hard to find good talent right now. So the market's thin for controls guys who are field ready and know the industry. And as a result, analytics are actually being used to I guess you'd say, as a stopgap in that regard, right? One of the things that the guys were saying to me is that, I can give you an additional employee with an analytics platform that never eats, never sleeps, runs 24/7, and will tell you everything that's going on and help you then be more, again, here I'm going to use that term that I love, prescriptive when you come on site the next day with your team and you dig into the CMMS tool. What work orders do I have? What things are really relevant to me? So that conversation around analytics is more about increasing awareness or getting more finite about what's going on in the facility. So I do see that it's really getting, again, granular in how we can approach specific things in the facility and go after them without having to have people mine data or watch dashboards and such.
Yeah, and that reminds me also that, if you're looking at a portfolio approach here, we've had some of our larger customers put together for this purpose, a real estate operations center, maybe not fully operations management, but for this issue, so that they could have a relatively few number of people looking at the analytics data and the faults, let's call them, and really triaging those. Because again, I want to defend, to be fair to our system integrators and facility managers who are already doing all they can in the building, and then for them to have to interpret and make decisions and then execute or not execute work orders is a lot to do in a daily routine. So one idea is to centralize that and then really boil it down to the work order, so then it just pops out that way. Now, add that also gives me a thought, Brian, maybe you have a comment on, is that, analytics now, it used to be just FDD, a decade ago. Now we're talking about analytics at the edge, embedded in the systems, and actually looking at and reacting to that right there on site in the system, in the sensor, kind of out on the edge. And what I just described was all the way over to a real estate operations center who's helping triage for the entire portfolio. So this gets back to, what do you mean by analytics and what's your approach to it?
That is on point, Tom. I don't even know how to expand on that, to be honest with you. I think you nailed it. I guess the only thing that I'd say to that is that a lot of times, especially when I talk to integrators about analytics, the first thing they'll say sometimes is, well, look, we also maintain this facility, right? So if we start putting analytics in and we run a ton of faults, we don't want these folks to have a negative connotation of what we're doing in the facility. And I definitely have to address that often and say, no, yeah, that's certainly not the case, and here's how we tell that story, right? And I go into it a little deeper in that analytics are, again, so finite, and they're more aware than any human can be. So quite frankly, you're going to find a lot of things, but a lot of them can be promptly ruled out, as you mentioned earlier, Tom. That some of them come up and we need to eliminate that rule, and here's why. And then all of a sudden you've dialed it into a very strong application in terms of, these are the things we really need to watch for in that facility, and there's about 10 of them, let's say. So
that's actually a really good point, and that sometimes people overbake or overthink this. If you're doing nothing today with data, and you could get 4 or 5 or 10 things you're looking for. Do I have lights on after hours? Do I have some piece of equipment cycling? I mean, if you didn't know that yesterday and you know that tomorrow, you've done something. You don't have to have the NASA dashboard up there and doing everything on the second day. So I think that's moderating that. And this really speaks, Brian, to your point about future proofing. Part of future proofing is just committing to the idea that data is important. And even before you're into the conversation we're having now, if you've got non-proprietary protocols, you started converging systems when you have the chance. Even if you did nothing different and you have non-proprietary converged systems that are cyber secure, you're poised to do whatever you want to do when you're able to do it, as opposed to really finding religion on analytics and big data and turn around to a siloed, uncyber secure environment.
Fantastic. Yeah. And, Jason, just one last point on that is that, if you even talk about use cases, what we've seen evolve recently is, we're pushing now monitoring-based analytics, right? So we're saying we can commission a facility just based on the analytics profile alone when the new systems go in and things. And we're getting a lot of traction with that. It was actually brought to us and people were asking the question, can we do this? The answer is yeah. So again, specific use cases and how we're seeing it evolve. So I'll use the sentence, we're all learning together, but it's kind of a fun thing. So.
All right, so we've got about 6 minutes left here. We've got 2 questions left. If we can't get to the last question, that's okay. We'll get to it through email. But this question actually made me think about our first webinar that we did in this whole series. And that's when we talked about the potential of having a pandemic mode, and then it was brought up that, in some dry climates we might actually need a wildfire mode because we can't do 100% outside air when there's a wildfire. And that brought up a really good point. And so this person's question, I feel like, almost speaks directly to that. And that is, how do you keep things flexible as new challenges come up? And specifically when you're talking about future proofing.
Yeah, my thought would be that if you've done the things we've been talking about, and we didn't talk enough about data normalization, but the idea that if I have an open lighting system and an open building automation system and they still aren't the same, even though they're open, you can put a black box in there so they can talk to each other. What we're really talking about is setting yourself up to create, at least in theory, an endless number of sequences, right? And that means if you can program now a wildfire mode, as you called it, or a humidity mode, as you alluded to, or an energy efficiency mode, and so being able to generate those sequences and not knowing what they're all going to be tomorrow or next week or next year allows you to do continuous use case changes and priority changes with the same infrastructure and systems.
Okay, and then it looks like we've got a couple of minutes here. We can get to this last question, and that is, do you foresee utility companies adjusting their baseline for energy management with the new recommendation for fresh air supply?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that was Brian, but
Right, Tom.
Yeah, well, we've worked a lot with utilities over the years, and you know, I think that they are underutilized from a building owner perspective, and I think that they themselves can do a whole lot more to get in tune with smart buildings and building systems for things like more intelligent demand response and load shedding and these kind of things, and not to mention the tariff and the rates that you were alluding to. So it's a really tough one. The only advice I would have is to really engage with your utility contact, because they all have account manager types, and leverage all that they have to offer in terms of tariff options, which I think there's more flexibility than people realize. And also, as your building gets smarter, consider more intelligent ways to do load shedding and demand response, which may relate directly to your rates.
Yeah, but they will definitely have to adjust those baselines, because they're about to see a ton more demand, I do believe, just based on that that recommendation alone. So it's going to happen by default anyway. So yeah, I do think they will.
And they've actually sent over a follow-up, and that is, given your experience with energy or utility companies, do you think that there's any rebates that could be related to energy management that we've been talking about in this webinar, anywhere on the horizon?
There are a number of underutilized rebate programs, just because, again, I think there's not enough interaction between utility account managers and the organizations. One thing we've observed and encouraged over the years encouraged that there are more of, and that is subsidies for more smart building solutions, like we talked about energy and FDD analytics, for example. I would suggest to the utilities, if you could show that there was a solution in place and workflow in place, then that should be subsidized just like an LED light bulb would in the residential environment.
Mm-hmm. And to just chime in on that, I think that they will. I mean, they almost have to, again, because we're going to have a ton of building owners out there who are going to have increased operational spend if, in fact, these outdoor air recommendations are followed. So I would think that the utilities would incentivize some rebate programs to put smart tech in, or even write new sequences around demand response and such.
Yeah. Last thought on that. The challenge there is that they have a certain number of subsidized capital that they're required to give out, and that is a fixed number, so they should maximize that. But when it comes to the rates, the tough part there is the rate base often gets the equal pain or benefit of rate changes. And with a tough economy, you really can't start lowering rates, because that gets spread across those that have a hard time paying electricity in the first place. So that's one of the challenges with the pricing structure that's in place for utilities today.
All right, that's our time. Brian, Tom, thank you so much for joining us on this, our third installment of our Lessons Learned from Industry Leaders series, Future-Proofing Your Smart Building Strategy. This has been a very insightful, very productive, I feel like, webinar. For everyone who's still listening, we will be following up with an email with a link to this full webinar. So if you know anyone who you feel like might benefit or might enjoy this, please feel free to share it. It's a YouTube link. It's open to everyone. Thanks so much, everyone, once again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Tom.